Black women who want to connect with their ancestors and work with their ancestors, but who grew up in the church, even if they're not a part of it now, we're often told that working with your ancestors was demonic or bad or evil in some way, and nothing could be further from the truth. And so that's what we're talking about today, how to work with your ancestors, specifically for the very first time. And so that's what we're diving into today. So, hi, I'm Trina Parham. I am a spiritual mentor and guide for Black women on alternative spiritual paths. So, if that sounds like you, you're in the right place. I'm also the creator of the Wild Waters Virtual Retreat, and it's really a space to help you connect with your spirit and your ancestors and find your way on your path. So, if that sounds good to you, you're in the right place. I'm glad you're here. So, let's dive in. Oh, one more thing about the Wild Waters Retreat. If you're interested in that and you'd like to schedule a free call with me to learn more, the link is below this video. So, let's talk about connecting with your ancestors. And I think this is something that we don't really talk a lot about outside of more structured or initiated traditions. And so I think a lot of times people think that if you aren't in an ATR or something like that, an African traditional religion or something like that, that you cannot connect with your ancestors or you don't practice hoodoo specifically. That's not something that you can do, but connecting with your ancestors is for everyone. And we all have them regardless of our lineage, background, whatever it is. And so it's available to you. It's available to you right now. And there's nothing really special that you need to do, but there are some things that will help you connect, and we'll talk a lot more about that. And so, yeah, I think this idea for me of connecting with my ancestors is something that I learned to do over time. And I can say, as someone who, I was raised in the church, raised in the Baptist church, I didn't realize how much we revered my ancestors until I got older. And I think there's this idea for people who don't work with their ancestors or connect with their ancestors regularly that somehow you're praying to your ancestors, and that's not actually what's happening. And so I want to clarify this. There's a difference between venerating your ancestors and celebrating them and worshiping them. Our ancestors are not gods. And so but they are there to give us guidance and direction and connection. And so oftentimes I tend to think of ancestors sort of like not quite like saints, but if you grew up Catholic or something like that, I feel like you probably have a better understanding of it. But in my experience, ancestors are yeah, they're there to help guide you. They're there to help you not feel so alone, to help you feel connected. And so you venerate them, you connect with them. And I've mentioned this in a previous video I did about an edible experience I had that helped me connect with my ancestors better. And there's a video on my channel about that. But anyway, um, there are all sorts of ways that I think we venerate our ancestors, um, and particularly in the Black culture, in the Black church, that we don't realize that's what we're doing and we don't call it that. And so I think anytime you do things where you keep a bunch of pictures up, or maybe you have the obituary around, or you're always telling stories about them when you get together with family, and you cook your mom's or your granny's favorite dish or whatever. That to me are moments of connection to our ancestors, and it's a really beautiful thing. And like I said, I think for me, I thought anything really outside of the church for a long time. I wouldn't say I thought it was demonic. I thought it was just bad, and that it wasn't something that I was supposed to do. And so the further that I got out, I and started meeting people who were regularly connecting with their ancestors and doing different things. I was like, oh, let me see what my people have to say to me. And this was challenging for me. Connecting with my ancestors was challenging at first when I thought about all of the generational curses and challenges in my family. And so, even though I love my family, I'm very close to my family. Come from a big family. There were still a lot of things in our ancestral lines that I felt like needed a lot of healing. And I don't want to dig into the craze too much into all our family drama and business, but there are a lot of things that needed to be worked on. And I think, lots of things around the kinds of relationships that women have, that the women in my family had with men, and, just all sorts of things that, were trauma related, lots of things that were passed down, like whether it was trauma. A lot of the women in my family have been sexually assaulted or sexually abused. That's something that's happened a lot until I would say recently, where that, thank goodness, has started to change. I think with more awareness and things like that. But so I think for me it was hard because as much as I love my family, there are a lot of things that I felt like, oh, what can they really teach me in this area? If I I think they needed to. A lot of my relatives who I knew have passed on needed to do a lot of healing, and they didn't do that earth side. And so that kept me stuck for a really long time, if I'm being honest, just thinking about um all of the ways in which my family really needed to heal, to go to therapy, to do all that stuff that I know my ancestors didn't do. And so I would often think to myself, okay, if I'm going to reach out to my ancestors, um, what what exactly can they teach me? What exactly can I learn? And so before I really dove in to working with my ancestors and getting them to help me and support me and all of that, I had a lot of healing to do. I had a lot of healing to do around the generational trauma and curses in my family. That's the way I saw it. And what I came to realize is there's also generational blessings too. And so I I I don't think that you have to heal all of your ancestral trauma in order to work with your ancestors. That's just not possible because there's so many things there. But I do think that um, it can be hard for a lot of Black people who aren't used to working with ancestors to connect with them without healing some of the ancestral line. And so, well, even when we think about like our history of enslavement and things like that, as some people kind of feel like, well, our people didn't do more, or if they were enslaved, like, how could they help us on this side? And I think sometimes we don't realize the strength of our people. We don't realize the strength of even just the people in our family, outside of us as a collective group of people, that our family, even if they didn't do everything perfectly, that they had a lot of strengths. I think particularly the mother line and the women in our families, we often don't give them enough credit. And I think, we talk about, if you didn't have the best relationship with your mom, or you weren't close to your grandparents, or maybe you didn't know them or something like that. And I think we have to realize, even if there's just this one piece of their life or something that they did that was really positive and really helpful, those are things to tap into. And I think another issue is, for a lot of Black people, Black American people, we're taught, not we're not taught, but when we come to this part where we in our lives where we want to um, sort of enhance our collective value and our strength and sort of fortify ourselves. We want to think of that all of our ancestors were kings and queens and this and that, and many of them weren't. Most of them weren't. Many of them were probably, merchants, or, fabric makers and weavers and things like that. Just, basic things that the community needed is probably what most of our people were doing. And there's a ton of value in that. We don't have to come from a royal line and tradition to have incredible value, worth, and for our ancestors to have things that they can teach us. And so I think we have to let go of that myth that we're all descendants of kings and queens. It's just not true. And you don't need that. You don't need that to connect with your ancestors. But I do think that if there's something in your way that you feel like, oh, my people didn't do this or that, um, you know, you you need to really heal and think about that before you connect with your ancestors. And maybe, they help you on that path, but I feel like that can be a real block and a hindrance for you and that will prevent you from connecting with them. So for me, this really looked like, telling the stories, the positive and the negative. A lot of times I think for Black women, we do not like to speak ill of our ancestors, especially not our mothers. Even if our mothers were terrible people, we don't like to speak ill of them. Or if they were pretty good mothers, but there are things that they didn't do right, or they needed help. They could have done a lot better in certain areas. We don't like to talk about that. And I can tell you right now, if you're connecting with your ancestors or you want to connect with your ancestors, that you have to be very honest with yourself about that. And so, I think that when you can take a close look and be honest with yourself about who your people were and who you actually came from, the good and the bad, it will go a lot better when you reach out to your ancestors, because it's honest, it's true. And, another thing is, nobody can really tell you how to do this exactly right. I think it's good to, if you really want to, dig into your ancestors and connect with them and create altars and things like that. There are good resources out there. One resource is Jambalaya by Louisa Tish, which is a great read. And there's all sorts of videos and things where people are talking about it. But ultimately, nobody knows your people like you. And they're going to connect with you in a way that makes most sense to you. And so, and it's a very simple practice. I think sometimes what can happen in the spiritual community and spiritual spaces is we make things so complicated. And anytime I think about something spiritual that's going to feed and nourish me and nourish the people that I work with, it's like, what are you really after? What is this really about? Like, let's get to the brass tacks, let's get to the basics of what it is that you really need and want. So is there something in your life that you want to achieve, that you're struggling to achieve? Is there something about yourself that you need to know, that you need to go a little bit deeper with? Why exactly do you need and connect to spirit in the first place? Why is it that you need and want to connect with your ancestors? Are you looking for guidance? What is it that you're looking for? And I think we have to separate out what spirit and ancestors can do for us and the things that we need to be doing for ourselves, and how much maybe our ancestors can guide us and give us and influence our direction and the path that we take and help make things clear. But we have to understand the difference in how all of this works, because sometimes I think that we treat anything that's spiritually related like it's Sky Daddy. We have a need, and I think it's hard. Black people, particularly again, if you grew up in the church, that you grew up believing that God or some divinity or something outside of you is going to make all these things right in your life and it's going to make all this stuff happen. And I think you can be aided and assisted, but I don't think that's really true. That's not really how it works. And so, but when people are in desperate situations or they're struggling with something, it can be very easy to think that your ancestors or whatever spiritual connection you make is going to solve all your problems. And it doesn't. At the very least, there are plenty of times that I talk to my ancestors or that I do some sort of spiritual work or ritual or ceremony for myself, and nothing happens. And it's really more about a connection with myself. But if nothing else, it has opened up a portal or a door inside of me that helps me go a little bit deeper. But to say I did this one thing with my ancestor altar and then I got this specific, very tangible result, while that can happen, it's not always the case. And so I think that's just important to name. But again, I think you have to be honest with yourself about why you want to connect with your ancestors and how they can help you, how they can support you. That sort of comes, down the line. But if there's issues with your people, you really want to begin to talk about it and get it out. Are you angry with them about something? Is it something about the way you retreated? And this is really getting more into the shadow work stuff, but are there patterns in your family that were really damaging or debilitating? I think for a lot of women, for a lot of Black women in particular, one of the one of the patterns, the familiar ancestor patterns that we see is sort of being the strong Black woman. Like no matter what you do, you take on all the burdens of family, of friends, and community, and you don't leave anything for yourself, and you die young or prematurely, or you get to the point where you're so sick and then there's nothing left for you, at the end of your life or when you're retired or whatever it is. That certainly is a lot of what I saw in my family, and what, that was part of, my sort of my lineage. And I was like, absolutely not on my watch, and that is something that is a cycle that I absolutely did break in my family. And if I look far back enough, pre-slavery, probably all of the women in my family were probably not like that. But as a result of, this this American experiment and everything that happened to us in this country, that's who Black women have become. And so I think when you start to pull those threads apart, you begin to heal a lot of maybe the anger, animosity, frustration, hurt, confusion from your relatives who have passed on, or just your family and your patterns in your family in general. And so I think if you can take a look at those patterns, name them. Sometimes you need to do this with a therapist. Sometimes, it's enough to do it on your own and with some journaling and other techniques. But I think it's important to at least tap into that stuff before you get started working with your ancestors so you can begin to clear and swab the decks. Like now I know for me that process took me some years. So I'm not saying to completely hold off when doing other ancestral work, but I think if you have any type of block that's preventing you from connecting with them, that's a good place to start. Now, for me, I really dialed into my ancestors after my mom passed away. And my mom and a cousin of mine and some other very, very close relatives that passed away. And I had other people who had passed on much, much earlier, like my grandma, my granny, who I was very, very close to, died many years ago, but, when I was in my 20s. So I was very close to her, but I didn't have the same need to connect with ancestors at the time. I just wasn't ready. But when my mom died, that was really like I'd already started this process by then, but I think I was anxious and really wanted to connect with her. And so my ancestral work really picked up after that happened. And so how do you start this? If you want to connect with your ancestors, how do you begin? So the simplest thing is creating some type of sacred space where you can just talk to them. And you want to have the elements represented. So, and by elements, I mean earth, air, fire, water. So, lighting a candle, a white candle, pouring a glass of water, um, maybe having a gem or crystal or something like that. You can have a picture of your ancestors or something like that. Do not put any pictures of living people on your altar, on your ancestor altar. Do not do that. So everyone on your ancestor altar should be an ancestor, should have passed on. Um, and so that's it. That's it. You start with something very basic. And maybe if there's something that that they liked, if you're thinking of a particular ancestor or something that is particular to your family, you can put that on. But you don't even need all of that. Like I said, a candle and some water and a stone of some kind or anything like that. That's really all you need. And you sit there, you know, get in a calm space, maybe do some breathing, a little meditation, and you just say, "Hey, I'm here. I want to connect and talk to my ancestors." If there's specific people you want to connect with, say their names and talk. Tell them what's going on with you. And look, it's going to feel very weird at first because this is not something that you're used to. But you start very simple. Even if it's just 5 minutes, 5, 10 minutes of you talking, maybe listening to music that they liked, things like that. It's a very simple process. And what will happen is the more you do it, let's say you decide to do it once a week, once a month, whatever it is that you want to do, um, it you start to notice patterns and things will come up for you in terms of better ways to connect with them. So, one of the things that I do when I spend time on with my ancestors and my ancestor altar is music. My folks love gospel music, and so I'll often sing. Sometimes I'll play music, but most of the time they want me to use my voice, and so I will sing and clap my hands, stomp my feet, whatever, as I'm telling them what's going on and connecting with them in the ways that I do. So at at the like I said, there's no real magic involved in this. I know for me, at the very least, it helps me feel connected. And I don't want to underestimate the value of that connection. That's really important for all of us to have. And so doing that, going through that process makes me feel very connected and nourished and filled in a way that other things don't give me that. And so and then for me, I'm big on dreams. I'm a dreamer. I have very vivid dreams. I have lucid dreams, all sorts of things. And the way that my ancestors and spirit connects with me is very much through my dreams. So, and it's been that way since I was a kid. So I expect, I know if I'm getting messages outside of me channeling something while I'm at my altar, is going to be through my dreams. And sure enough, they will show me in a way that I understand, things that I need to know. So, and for you, might be different. Another way that I've been working with my ancestors more lately is art. So artwork, and I am not an artist like at all. I'm a terrible artist, but child, I will draw something related to my ancestor. You understand me? Like I will get, and I've been painting for years. And again, I'm not good at it. I just like playing in paint. I think it's fun. And so as a result of that, I think it's because, I'm accessing a different part of my brain. And so when I paint, when I'm coloring, when I'm doing anything like that, my ancestors show up, spirit shows up. And so it's really a way of how I'm connecting. And it really is a very beautiful experience for me. And again, that's how those messages come through a lot of the time. And so, but this is with practice, and this is over years. And so I want to encourage you, if this is something that you want to do it and to start, and to just know it will build slowly over time. This is a relationship that you're building. You're reconnecting with them on the other end. Um, and so it might take some time, and it's there's nothing to rush. you know you'll do it, like I said, once a week or whenever you can. I think having something a little more regularly is good, just so that you can get into the flow of it, get used to it, all of that. I think is really helpful. But that's it. And it's just that simple. And I think that you'll be surprised at, the messages that they share with you, or things that maybe someone comes back into your life that you haven't seen in a while. All sorts of things start to shift when you start connecting with your ancestors, maybe things you never even thought of before. And I think it's a really beautiful relationship, and the way that they can support you, and it's a really beautiful thing. Also, I think it can really help you heal relationships with people who have passed on. So if you know I think in my dreams I've been able to resolve. My mom and I were very much at peace when she passed away, and there wasn't anything unresolved, but I think there were things that um, I wish could have been different, maybe, in our relationship. And so I've been able to work through that and talk through that, and it makes a difference. And so I would say, if you have something that's unresolved with someone who's passed on, doing ancestral work, connecting with your ancestors is a really good way to do that. Now, one thing that I do, um, I think it's important to connect with well ancestors and ancestors who mean you well. And so I'm not going to elaborate on that too much, but that's a recommendation that I have. And I know people have all different ways of working with their ancestors. Let me tell you, people, they make it up. There's no hard and fast rule about how to work with your ancestors. Everybody makes it up. Even if it's written down in a book somewhere, somebody made it up. And so And I say that to say there's no one right way to do it. And so once you start and just sit and connect, a whole different path might open up for you. So I just want you to know, like, again, there's no magic involved, there's no secret veil around this. It really is you going into your private space, to your altar, to your sacred space, or whatever it is, and you making this connection for yourself. And then based on that, it'll unfurl and it will grow, and it will become a very beautiful thing. So I want to take a look and see. I'm just looking at my notes here to see if there's anything that I missed. Yeah, so you talk to your ancestors like you would talk to anybody else. You share with them, share your thoughts, share what's going on in your life, all those sorts of things. And like I said, as you go, you might begin to add things to your altar, to your sacred space, things that they really liked. Um, yeah, working through the trauma, I talked about that. Um, Oh, you you have it's important to realize and remember that you have a long line of ancestors to choose from. And so if you feel like, granddaddy, big mama, whoever are not the ones that you want to connect with, that's okay. You don't have to. Even if you don't know all your people and all of that, you have ancestors. You come from somewhere, you come from somebody. And so it's not a requirement that when you connect with your ancestors, that you connect with the most recent ancestors. That's just something that I do where I find a lot of value, but I certainly have connected to much older ancestors who I never met. I'm talking probably 500 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago. Like, I've connected with ancestors all through my line. Okay. And so if you really are having a hard time breaking through because of a complicated relationship, maybe with a parent or another close relative, you don't have to work with those people. Or again, if you're like adopted or, something like that where you don't really know them, you don't need to do that. Um, you can connect with who, again, your well ancestors and your ancestors who mean me well, even if you don't know them. And when you go and you connect and you go to your altar, you can do exactly that, and just say that and see what comes up for you. This is something that's available to all of us. And then as you go and you start connecting with those ancestors, you might start to get signs, symbols, ideas, thoughts about who you came from. I haven't done like ancestry.com. I haven't gotten like DNA or anything like that, but maybe that's something you want to try, and to just see, where your people come from. And and if you find that, maybe you can put some symbols or things like that on your altar that represents that culture, that place where they come from. That's something that's a good way to connect. But yeah, there's that. Just know that you can do that. And maybe, and also too, if there's people who aren't in your bloodline, but um they are an ancestor, you can connect with them as well. Now, I will say I think it's very important to connect with your bloodline. And when you're doing ancestral work, there's a lot of healing there for you. There's something about that I just think is really important when you're doing ancestral work, but it's not the only thing. So, like I said, if there's someone who maybe was a mentor, a guide in your life who's an ancestor now, or another someone that for whatever reason you want to connect with and ask for guidance, that I believe that you can do that. But again, your ancestors, your blood relatives and your bloodline has incredible value. And so that's what I'm saying. If there's certain people in your line that you don't want to connect with, you don't have to. And but you can reach further back, and there's someone there that can help you, that will be supportive, that you're proud of and you want to connect with. And again, you kind of got to work through that stuff, but it's there and you have that available to you. Okay. Um, oh yeah, yeah. Tell the stories of your ancestors, good and bad. Don't sugarcoat it. That's the other thing. You're not hurting their feelings. You're not doing anything like that. Be honest. This is the place for you to be honest. If there's things that they did that pissed you off, if there's things that they did that you don't understand and you want to understand, if there's things that they did that hurt you, also just the really fun things. My ancestors, they're funny. They're funny, and anytime I connect with them now, it's like a family reunion. My family had a lot of family reunions, and just coming from a big family, we had a lot of big family gatherings, and that's what connecting with my ancestors feels like. It's fun, they crack jokes, like, it's just it's a good time, like, the stuff that I remember that they used to do, or, like, when I'm making my drawings or when I'm dreaming of them or I've channeled them in some way, like, they're funny. They're really funny, and so that's my experience with my people. But, so it doesn't have to be this very serious, tight, buttoned up, thing that has to be sacred and uh, there has to be this very sacred, formal thing. There's sacredness in laughter and just connection and joy and happiness and jokes. Like whoever your people were, like let it be what it is, but also being honest. That means a lot. And so and I think because ultimately this is for you. I don't, I think there's some thoughts around ancestor work where you're sort of healing them. And I just I don't believe that. I don't believe in that. I do believe that any ancestral work that you do is ultimately for you and for your healing and growth and nourishment. And so it's all for you and for your line and your family and things that you can do to heal and be better and to get more out of this life. And so I think that's ultimately what it's for. And so, so be honest. Go with them with the things that you want to say and work on the things you want to work on. Ask for help with the things that you need help with. They're so easily and readily available to connect with us. And so I think it's a really great idea to connect and to let them help and guide you. It's a really just a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful experience. Um, let's see here if there's anything else I want to talk about. Yeah, I think this is it. So the spiritual and emotional healing, connection is possible. Um, Again, this isn't about worship. It's about reverence, relationship, and remembrance. So anytime remember your ancestors, you build that relationship, that rapport with them on the other side. It just, like I said, it builds and grows over time, and it makes a big difference. And I think you'll start to feel better. I sometimes, I think when you feel like there's something missing, particularly when you step outside of the church or outside of a formal religious path, you can start to feel like you're just wandering aimlessly. And I think connecting with your ancestors does ground you. It's a very good um, it's a very good tool experience that can be grounding, nourishing, and filling. And so if you're feeling that, if you're feeling spiritually bereft or sort of in the wind and needing a little bit more something to really anchor you, connecting with your ancestors is a really great place to start. Okay. So that's it. I hope this was helpful. If you're interested in learning more and you want to connect with your ancestors or you're wanting some support as you do that, I encourage you to sign up for a free call with me. And you can click the link below this video to do that. And I'll tell you how I can support you in connecting with your ancestors in the Wild Waters virtual retreat. And so, but yeah, on that call, we'll talk and connect and just get to know each other a little bit, and I'll see how I can support you. So again, if you're interested in that, the link is below this video. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.